everybody, welcome to the Purple Corner. This is our little corner of the internet. I'm Prakriti, and today we are in conversation with Mike Downey, who's an acclaimed film producer, author, journalist, activist, known for contributions across the spectrum, including cinema and literature. And after producing over 100 films, he's out with his first novel, Istria Gold, and he's signing in from Istria, which is a saga spanning 2000 years, an adventure story. And I think just the timeline is enough to kind of illustrate the scale of this work. The book is set against the backdrop of Croatia's Istrian Peninsula and delves deep into the region's history, culture, traditions, offering the readers a narrative that echoes the works of esteemed authors such as Martin Walker. And the book has been published by Calm Productions and MP Press in the UK and Ireland, and is being distributed by Authors Upfront in India. He's a very, very long career graph, so I'm not going to delve much into it. I want to get straight to the conversation about the book. Mike, it's so interesting and exciting to speak to you today, because dinner table conversations go, the world's moving from book to film. But you've had this journey that's, I won't say reverse, but you've now dabbled in both. How did that come? I've read a little bit about how you stayed in Istria in the past for 3 months, but I still want to know how the need and to write about this region now. Why now, and how did that come about? I'd love to know.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Prakriti. I'm very, very pleased to be here. I'm always glad to engage with the media, especially from India, which holds a very special place in my heart. I, for a significant part of my life, had an Indian partner for 5 years from Kerala. And so I spent a long time in and around Trivandrum and Kovalam and this beautiful part of India, and so a little bit of my heart is still there, as I always say. That having been said, and in reply to your opening salvo, yes, it is kind of, it's a new start for me. It's a beginning in a weird kind of way. I've always been a bit of a late bloomer, so it's sort of. It took me a while to kind of get out of academia and into theatre, which was where I kind of began my creative career. And then it took me a while to get out of theatre and into film via publishing. So I kind of did a 10-year detour into publishing before I started producing films at the age of 40. So I've only been producing films for 20 odd years. In that time, as you say, I produced over 100 movies, which is, as we say, if you put it all together with regard to, academe, theatre, publishing, it's a long time in the world of narrative. And of course, the idea of moving from this very kind of industry intense and people intense business, which is the highly collaborative art of creating the Gesamtkunstwerk that is cinema, to essentially moving out of the orchestra, if I may mix my metaphors, and becoming a soloist as a writer. But it's not unusual. There are two things about that, I think, that's not unusual. First of all, it's very it's not rare now that filmmakers are writing novels. Werner Herzog just wrote a novel for the first time. David Cronenberg has written a novel. Tarantino did a novelization of his own of his own movie, and it's fine. And it's not so weird for old guys to start writing late. For example, Raymond Chandler didn't start till he was 55. Charles Bukowski didn't start till he was 55. Lee Child started at 40. Mary Wesley notoriously started at the age of 71 before she won the Booker Prize, I think. So, you know, there is a tradition of old farts going into the literary universe late in life. And I think that's not, it's not a, you know, it's not a bad thing. Everything happens for a reason, and usually one thing is leading to another. I always felt just before I became a film producer that my whole life had been leading up to that at that time, and that the collective use of all of the experiences I'd had until that time, whether it's in creative narrative, whether it's an understanding of the commercial aspects of it, whether it's kind of, you know, being used to being a general in an army or whatever, all of those things apply. And similarly, I think there comes a time in one's life, if one has literary ambition, that there is a time and a place for it. And 3-4 years ago was the time and the place for me.
3-4 years ago, which did the genesis of the idea predate that, or you just kind of said, okay, you had something brewing in your head, and then 3-4 years ago, okay, let's start typing it out or writing it out. What was the journey of the idea?
Right, I think that's good question. The answer is sort of vague because I've not written down any dates or anything like that. But I think it must have been about 4 years ago. So I became 60 years old, and I thought, listen, part of your mission in life is to write a novel. You better get on with it if you kind of want to fulfill it while you're still alive. So you better, start making some sense in that area. In itself, the story in itself sort of found me rather than me finding the story in a weird kind of way, because I figured as I left it so late to write something that it had better be ambitious, it had better be good, and it had better kind of, not be a regular piece of, 150-page potboiler that you knock out and kind of go, okay, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. Let's try to do something a little bit more ambitious, and let's try to do something with scope and scale and size. And I've never really thought of myself as an expert in any kind of historical nature, but I know quite a lot of things about history. I studied, the first 18 years of my education, I was sort of a classicist. So, so the Roman area is no stranger to me. As a young socialist, I lived in Yugoslavia and worked at the National Theatre in Belgrade when I was 20 years old. So I have some experience of life under socialism in a Slavic country, viz. Yugoslavia, out of which Croatia eventually came. And the other part of the book is the activist side of, the contemporary eco-warrior thing, in which I also have a camp. So it's sort of writing from experience in terms of the times that we're talking about. But in terms of coming up with an idea for a novel, in the end, I came up with the idea more or less for 3 novels and kind of wove them together into one. And as I was being that ambitious at that point, I said to myself, hey, you still have a lot to say about this place because you've spent a lot of the last quarter of a century here. If you're going to write essentially what the first book is a sort of a trilogy, why not write 3 books about Istria and make it a trilogy of trilogies kind of thing? And therefore, while it's it's not the Rougon Macquart, it's a bigger idea of, essentially 9 novels all woven together, which are all connected. And the first one is Istria Gold, is the one that we're talking about today, which is, I believe, kind of, if you can say, what is it about? It's about greed. The second one is Istria Black, which takes place in 3 different time frames as well, which is about hate. and the third one is Istria Blue, which is I say about corruption, or will be about corruption, because I'm only mapping it out at this point. And the entire trilogy is called Three Colors Istria, with a sort of a nod to Krzysztof Kieślowski, who was somebody that I knew and as a filmmaker feel a deep affinity for. So from his his Three Colors series, so.
It's even grander than we've kind of read about already, right? So Istria Black and Blue still in the writing process. You mentioned at the beginning so aptly that production is or creating cinema is this collaborative exercise versus writing, which is such an isolated task at the end of the day. I also think emotionally, and I have very, very little experience and exposure of the filmmaking process, but I think emotionally, production, like managing events, like managing people, is a lot of gives you a lot of adrenaline. It pumps you up. It gives you this dopamine hit time and in quick succession. I write a little bit myself, and I feel like writing is the opposite. It's this draining exercise where you're constantly losing energy as you put the words down. How's that? Like, did you feel that shift in terms of yourself when you moved from one role to another? Just the act of it, right? The daily act of producing a film or working on a film versus the daily act of working on a book are so vastly different. Or did you have to kind of grapple with the change and transition?
It's so different. My old mate Alexandra Inaritu always says that making a film is hard, making a good film is war, and making a great film is a miracle. And I've sort of hinted at before, making a movie is like being part of an army. It's that it's where the creative process meets the industrial process, and you turn money into light. And putting a value on that is very, very, very difficult, because what are you left at the end of it? It's sort of like if it works, it's great. If it doesn't, there's nothing to do with this thing. It's just sort of there and nobody watches it. I've found making the transition to writing every day really very, very easy. I've always written every day of my life anyway, whether it's journalism, whether it's to friends, whether it's professional stuff, whether it's I've written a number of books, non-fiction books about film production and stuff like that. And I used to publish magazines and stuff, which were, essentially kind of writing to order a lot of the time. So the fear of the empty page and the keyboard is sort of like, I don't have it. So, and very often with people like me who are sit down there and write for 4 hours and don't get up until you've written for 4 hours. It's great. We can do it. But, again, like everyone else in situations like that, you're only as good as your editor. And with someone like me, who I said who suffers from terrible logorrhea, I need a good editor, and I have one, which I'm very, very happy about. But in terms of the actual process, the moving from being in the army to being being a sniper, very. There was absolutely no problem in making that transition at all. But also, I found a way of working which allows me to keep a foot in my productions, as well as kind of doing doing my writing as well. And I'm at the moment I've just finished the first draft of Istria Black, which should be with my UK publisher out in September, October. So. We're moving along like that. Do I miss the cut and thrust of the daily madness of the film set and all of its problems? No. absolutely not. I've sort of done that, and I will continue to do it because I still have a lot of artists and filmmakers that I work with and I like to work with. But I suspect I won't be taking on any more new, younger directors and investing in their careers, because I'm investing in my own new, young career at the moment, which is, it's working out. Istria Gold has now sold to over 16 territories, I think, and it's already been out in the UK, Ireland, Bulgaria. It will be in Croatia next month, and then it will go to Ukraine, China, Russia after the war is finished, because I've done a contract which I won't sell the book to Russia unless the war is over, etc., etc. So it's been satisfying, not just from a creative point of view, but in the knowledge that there is an audience out there, and it seems that people do want to read it. So, touch wood, it will.
Absolutely. You said the transition is easy, and perhaps in that case, what I find a lot of writers might struggle with across trilogies, in fact, trilogies of trilogies, across timelines, is keeping up with two parts, and this is a two-part question, is the research and then the organization of that, which I suspect, having been in films, having known what collaborative work is, you may have found easy. But even then, how much research was required? Because, knowing a place and having an experiences and a lived experience is one thing. And then having to write about it, about a particular region across different times and eras is entirely another. So one is how much research and what was the process of research. And then the second part of that question is, I ask all writers, because everyone has some quirky way of kind of organizing those notes to make sense, even within a book. And this is 3 different books. If you could talk a little bit about those 2 things.
Yeah, sure. The research, absolutely. Obviously, in your mind, you're always saying to yourself, "Hey, this is fiction. This is my version of history. This is they're my characters. I invented them." That's fine, but unless you have your facts straight, or as straight as possible, or as you can't bend the truth until you know what the basic truth is, kind of thing. So I probably was reading for about a year before setting any pen to paper at all. And then probably I did another 3 to 4 months reading at the end of 3rd or 4th draft, something like that, to really sharpen and refine, and also to borrow, because what was it Picasso said? Good artists steal, good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Yes.
So on the research front, and you'll see in the bibliography of the book that it is very extensive, and I've also taken trouble in not just to do a bibliography, but to kind of make a few comments about each book, about why this book was important, or how it influenced me, or whatever, because very often, in situations like, you're only as good as your research, and as the pre-Socratic philosophers said, there is nothing new under the sun, and we're not going to be inventing, in the end, anything entirely original. What is original is this this structure and the way you weave the stories together, and that hasn't been done anywhere before. So in that respect, it really required a lot of, after the research, a lot of mapping out. And essentially, I suppose what I did is I wrote a long, rambling, like a film treatment, I suppose, this happens, and then this happens, and then he's going to say this, and then they're going to say that, and then I'll write a whole load of dialogue, and then I'll say, okay, here we cut. Then we're going to go to this place. Then we're going to go, and this is going to happen there, and things like that. So I sort of do a bit of a stream of consciousness, kind of. Pretty much 2/3 of the book I would do like that, and it's the same with the second one. Deliberately not doing the end, because you're only going to work out, if you know more or less how you want it to end, you're only going to get the best possible ending if it's the sum of all of its parts, and you don't know what the sum of the parts are until you get there. And so if the timing of pretty much everything, as you're not just going for one climax in one book, you kind of are going for, 3 climaxes, which come together in the end in an uber climax kind of thing, which is hopefully where the extra pleasure of reading comes, because the cumulative effect of the drama hopefully is much more than a straight single narrative kind of thing. So that's sort of how that worked, really. And that I found with the correct, with a good amount of thought and planning and sort of hard structural work, and really rewriting, especially towards the end, rewriting, just how you reach the kind of the denouement. Again, the end sort of writes itself as well, I think, if you've been disciplined, enough to kind of get it to the point where it's mature to kind of conclude itself as a story. So yeah.
Had you given it, this is just curious, had you given yourself deadlines the way, to kind of make sure that you keep to them? Or you said, okay, we'll figure when we're done?
Yeah, but they don't get stuck to, or what I do is I'll have a deadline, and then something will happen, and I'll go, oh, now I really must go back and redo that section. And then you come back to that section and you kind of go, oh, that's not too bad, actually. I'm sort of back on schedule again. I don't really have to do some. So in your mind, very often, what you need to do in terms of rewriting and things like that is much worse than than it is in real life, kind of thing, and maybe takes less time. And then the things that you're smug about and you think that you've got it sorted out and things like that, you have to throw away, of course. And that's the most difficult thing, of course. Killing your children is, but you have to do it, unfortunately. But
yeah, I think is the toughest part.
I hate wasting stuff. As a former kind of jobbing writer, I always think that there's something in every, don't chuck everything away. Keep, there's going to be something that you can use that for, kind of thing, So
you have a folder or documents full of all the stuff that you've deleted?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I keep everything. Yes.
That's amazing. You mentioned, I'm blanking out. We probably have to cut this part. I had a question, then I just went blank.
Don't worry.
Yeah, you mentioned Socrates, and you mentioned filmmakers who inspired you, whose work you've been kind of inspired by. But just speaking about your reading journey or journey as a reader, you said you have had 10 years in publishing, and you've had a connection with narrative for, I think, all your life, I guess. But what were the early? Did you use? I feel that a lot of my early influences of my reading keep coming back to me. Does that happen with you? And if yes, who were the kind of writers, and what were the kind of stories that shaped early Mike, and that kind of built stuff that you then built upon?
Yeah, I mean, it's different. Again, late bloomers. Different people kind of engage with literature properly in their own time, I think. Some people at school or university kind of go to school, go to university, read their books, and they actually understand why they're doing it and what it is and how it all fits together and things like that. Other people maybe go and study literature or whatever, but when you read Macbeth when you're 13, do you really understand it. And I think it was, for me, I can say that, you know, the whole kind of French existentialist literary scene, whether Camus, de Beauvoir, Sartre, etc., you know, was something that I was obsessed with between 15 and 18, say, and probably wasn't reading anything else. But when now I look back at it, I think, God, I didn't understand a thing, really. It was a kind of a junior literary posturing kind of thing. And then you find your literary, it's only by reading widely and also by reading shamelessly and reading without caring about criticism or caring about the critics that you find kind of joy in literature, I think. And I don't know, it's, you know, I could go through my bookshelves and I'd probably say yes, everything, you know, but the names that would kind of jump out to me would be, you know, people like John Irving, you know, again, somebody who writes with great kind of, it's like a door opening. He says, come on in and understand me. I'm not concealing my meaning from you. Stick with my story, stick with my narrative. He's very Dickensian in that sense. There's nothing complicated in a literary sense. It's character driven and it's location driven, and it's, you know, about the space that his characters are, and it's not trying to be clever in any way, shape, or form. Just telling a bloody good story. And John Irving did that all of his life. And I still, you know, I'm slashing my wrists to wait for, you know, the next John Irving, but I don't think there will be another one. But I think his last chairlift one might be the, who knows? But, you know, if somebody like John Irving, somebody like Haruki Murakami, you know, again, Murakami, you know, kind of came upon me by accident. And then, you know, I've sort of grown with him in the sense that, yeah, I think probably his earlier books, you know, were kind of bite-sized and, you know, easy for me to get hold of, and you could kind of enter his particular cosmos and things like that. And then, thank goodness, he grew into a kind of a much more verbose and epic writer, like Irving, in fact, you know. And so, you know, if I could take two people from the contemporary literary pantheon, let's say, there are those. And then, you know, I've worked with a lot of novelists personally on scripts as well, and so became fans of through working with them, whether it's Gunter Grass, with whom I did a film called Call of the Toad, Thomas Keneally, who wrote Schindler's List, of course, and which I developed one of his books about Shackleton's voyage to the pole. Colm Toybeen, I produced his first original screenplay. But of course, I came to Colm Toybeen as a fellow Irishman, as kind of the father of the literary nation. You know, it's you know, someone extraordinary. And then the crazy James Ellroy, with whom I worked on a film called Killer on the Road, probably his meanest, nastiest, most evil book, I would say. Wow. So there's kind of a lot of people like that, and a lot of lesser known kind of novelists as well, John Griesemer, etc., etc. But one of the great things about approaching brilliant novels that you're going to turn into a film is that you kind of have a very academic and objective sense of structure, and a very objective sense of, okay, we want to do this with a screenplay, we want to do this with, you know, with a, you know, but the novel is doing this. And so the best writers to work with are the ones who kind of understand that it's not the same thing, that it's going to be different, and you have to accept it's going to be different for no other reason, actually, than a screenplay isn't designed to be read as such. One, it is designed to be consumed by various people, a financier, a actor, the whole kind of spectrum of all of the people who work on this total work of art kind of thing. So you write to press different buttons, which is why it's an impure and kind of flawed work of art in itself. It's a blueprint rather than anything definitive. So
that is such a succinct way of
can't remember what you asked me then.
No, I was very curious about that anyway. About adaptation. So you kind of just I think you predicted it. Yeah, I mean, you answered the question I had about what makes it good. Yeah. We have about a minute left, so I want to end with two things. One is, do you ever see Istria, the Istria trilogy of colors becoming any sort of visual, piece, film, series, etc.? And yeah, that's one. And are you going to be coming to India to promote this? Because I'd love to kind of meet you in person.
I originally had planned to come to India, and then my movie that I'm making with Agnieska Holland now, which is a big $10 million movie about Kafka. So we're doing a biopic about Kafka. So my literary endeavors are engaged in dealing with the biopic of Kafka, which starts shooting in 10 days' time in Prague. And as soon as we've done this, I'm going to Prague.
Wow.
And I'm very happy with that we're making that film, because I don't believe that anyone has done justice to the Kafka biography yet, and I think that we've got a nice kind of experimental way of doing it, but it's quite a big film, so there's a kind of an element of risk involved, which I'm very happy about. The first part of your question now, what or as a movie or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like that. I think it would be great. I think it would be brilliant if somebody just came, took it off my hands, went away, and then when it was finished, asked me what I thought of it. They wouldn't have to take any notice of my notes or anything like that. I'd tell them what I thought about it, and then that's it. I don't think, I've lived with this story for long enough already, and sometimes it, and I will have with the next two books as well. And I think that will be enough. I mean, my one of the films I was involved with early on was the film Billy Elliot, which was directed by my very dear friend Stephen Daldry, my old school friend, and that had a massive success as a film, as a theater musical, as a novelization, and the whole thing, and the thing, was made in the year just 2000, 2001, and the stage show is probably still touring now, 25 years later.
Wow.
It was in the West End for 10 years and things like that, that's amazing. But if you're a hairdresser, and you have to work on the same head for 25 years, it's going to get a bit messy. I always say,
talking Steve, about
whilst I admire how fabulously wealthy it's made you, there comes a point where you have to draw the line.
That is I just never heard someone speak from it about it from that perspective. So that's fantastic. This has been amazing. I've just been thinking about how much I could ask you, but then that we just be talking forever. So for this, yeah,
I'm going to get to Prague. So
you have to get to Prague, exactly. I've enjoyed this so much and look forward to finishing the rest of the book. It's taken me a minute to get through it.
Oh, it's not, It's a brick. It's a brick. Yes, it's.
I love that. And but it's, you know, it's a brick that you keep coming back to. So, you know, it's something that draws you in and immerses you. The last time I felt that, I was reading Dune, that I was just like into the book and the film. So this is like it's like you said, I read so much of these sized books, or slightly bigger, that it's nice to have a world that you're entering,
Right.
which is also
Yes.
very
Yes.
different. You know, it's not a familiar history or geography or characters. So I like that. I like that newness that I'm experiencing. So thank you for that as well.
That's good. And also, you know, the history, the culture, the art, the
Yeah.
visual art, the cuisine, the food, the wine, the all of that is that's why I find it very reminiscent of, you know, of Martin Walker's Bruno
But yeah.
detective story, because
Yes.
he does a similar thing with the Dordogne. And the Dordogne
Yes.
is also a truffle place as well, you know.
Yes.
So there are a lot of little things reflected there, accidentally, I might add. Very
We'll
good.
go back to the Picasso quote.
Yes, exactly. Excellent. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you so much,
And
Mike.
please reach out if you have any further questions. Very,
Absolutely.
very
Thank you so
happy
much.
to.
Have a
Okay.
lovely trip to Prague. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care, my dear. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.